You and I are navigating on this fragile spaceship. We share with millions of other forms of life. And even if it doesn't feel that way sometimes, we are all needed to change its course.
Because the challenges we're facing are unprecedented. We have entered a new planetary epoch, the Anthropocene.
Accelerated climate change, biodiversity loss, rising sea levels.
These terms have become all too familiar.
We know the challenges ahead and the need for a turn to sustainability. But our route towards this goal isn't clear yet.
But luckily, change starts with the questions we ask. How can we change the way we look at the world? How can we connect the tools to accelerate into the future? And who actually is responsible for the current environmental crisis? What policies can guide us into the future? And where should we start?
None of the traditional academic disciplines can find the answers on their own. We need to collaborate across backgrounds and disciplines.
Together, we can find the right course.
That's exactly what we do here at de Vrije Universiteit. Biologists, sociologists,
Economists, earth scientists, theologians.
We need them all to learn from each other and raise those difficult questions.
And mixing it up is what we're good at. At the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute, we catalyze connections, we foster collaboration, and we build partnerships so that we can innovate for a better and more sustainable future.
That's why we are very excited to be the host of the 17th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic and Social Sustainability.
And in the next few days, you will experience the strengths of collaboration. Get amazed and be surprised about the many novel interdisciplinary ways of looking at sustainability and moving from research to impact. Get ready to set course and accelerate towards a more sustainable future. Welcome to our conference. Yes, indeed, a very warm welcome to our conference, now live from Amsterdam, the 17th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic and Social Sustainability, hosted by the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute here at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. I would like to say good afternoon, but I'm actually not sure if that's correct for everyone because we have people from all around the globe watching. So in different time zones, it might be morning, it might be deep at night. So I just say hello and welcome. We are very, very excited to finally kick off our conference with our plenary event, a very exciting event on the question of how we can accelerate the transition into a more sustainable future. This is also one of the key conference themes that we will address in the next couple of days. Now, before we jump into our panel and we will introduce our very distinguished speakers, I want to give the floor to some of my colleagues who have helped to make this conference possible. So first of all, I want to give the floor to Philip Kalantzis-Cope. He's the Chief Social Scientist at Common Grounds Research Network, and he has been planning this conference with us. And he has been very accommodating when we told him that we will not be able to be in Amsterdam physically, but we have to do everything virtually. And he and his team were very, very helpful to make this happen. So I want to give the floor to Philip for some words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Philip, for that introduction. As you walk through the halls of your building, I felt a kind of sting. I think we all felt a little sting of how amazing it would have been to be together in person this year. Your team has done such a wonderful job in not just directing the thematic focus for this year, but bringing in some fantastic speakers to really think constructively about these big picture questions, but also practically about the world that we're in and how we can engage and change that world. I am sad that we are not there together again, but we have a wonderful program for you. And in the last year, what we have been doing at Common Ground Research Networks is really thinking about what the future of the Scholarly Conference is, and how does it map, how does it contest, how does it push our understandings of what sustainability is in general. So, you know, we hope you enjoy what we can deliver for the next few days, and we look forward to the conversation that we have about not just the future of our planet, but the ways in which that we talk, produce, and get our ideas out to the world. So big thank you to everybody, and I'm looking forward to engaging for the next few days. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip, for these kind words. Also reminding us that not everything is bad. Actually, I think we have dramatically reduced the emissions that we would have had under normal circumstances, making this conference possible. I want to give the floor now to one of my co-chairs, David Humphries. David Humphries is a professor of environmental policy at the Open University in the UK, and he has been together with the other co-chair, Stuart. He has been here from the beginning, so I want to provide space for David to also give his welcome. David, welcome to this conference, and the floor is yours. David got lost, okay? Yes, he might come back, and then we hear his words of welcome later. Then I want to introduce our third co-chair, Stuart Cloving from this university. Stuart is an associate professor at the Faculty of Humanities. He's working on the Anthropocene. He has lots of interests and a lot of, let's say, duties. One of them is that he's also the co-lead of the newly established Environmental Humanities Center here at this university. I'm very, very happy that you're here, Stuart, because you will be the chair of this opening plenary. So I want to give you the burden and say, Stuart, you are now in charge. Lead us through this open plenary and the question how we can accelerate into the future for a more sustainable future. Stuart, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip. Indeed, I'm very happy also to open up this conference together with my colleagues, also from the United States and America, from Common Ground. And we're very eager also to start this conference because we have a lot of things to cover and a lot of ground to cover and also a lot of sustainability to cover. And I'm very happy also to be able to chair this keynote session with you. And we're already a bit ahead of time, which is good because then we are able also to bring us, have us more time for discussion. So we have a great series of keynotes coming up this afternoon for us and this morning for somebody else in the world, of course. So we have different various time zones. We'll be featuring Marjan Minnesma, we'll be featuring Christian Felber, and featuring Diederik Samson. And they all are three keynote speakers of excellent quality, which can lead us into this great 17th International Conference on Economic, Social Sustainability, Cultural, Economic, Social Sustainability. So I think it's time for me now to introduce Marjan. And Marjan Minnesma is studied business administration, philosophy, and international law. She has been campaign director for Greenpeace Netherlands, and she founded Urgenda, an organization for innovation and sustainability to make the required transitions happen. And Urgenda actually worked as a front runner on solutions, from the first collective buying initiative for solar panels to the first electric car produced in series. In order to further speed up the transition process, she brought the government to court, together with almost 900 citizens, to demand more action, and she won twice. Marjan has been named the most influential person working in the field of sustainability in the Netherlands and was to be declared to be a leading global thinker by the authoritative American magazine Foreign Policy. She's the chair of OM Nieuwe Energie, that's the Dutch umbrella organization of 40 local sustainable energy cooperatives. Today, we are proud that Marjan Minnesma is our first keynote speaker of the 17th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic, and Social Sustainability. Marjan, the floor is yours. I'm happy that you can be here.
I'm happy to be here too. Nice to be back. I've been working here at the Free University at the Institute for Environmental Studies roughly 15 years ago. So it has changed quite a bit since then, I've seen. And a lot has happened in the last 15 years. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. After I worked here at the Free University at the Institute for Transitions at the Erasmus University, where we at a certain point had 30 different people doing their PhD on all kinds of transition topics. And I told my colleague, Professor Rotmans, it's nice that there are so many books now, but what do we really change in real life? And that was how Agenda started, because we felt challenged to use the knowledge from the science to make a change in the Netherlands and to accelerate sustainability as quickly as possible. So I've tried to put my slides on now. Are they somewhere? Yeah. Thank you. So we started with Agenda in 2007. And at that point, we thought with the transition theory, we need to assist frontrunners to scale up, to try to move as quickly as possible. And we also tried to make a movement of frontrunners and people that wanted to make the transition as quickly as possible. But while doing that, we saw that there were quite a few things that nobody was taking up. And we tried to fill in those gaps. And I give you a few examples of those. In 2008, there were hardly any electric vehicles. There were only a few that were actually combustion engine vehicles, of which the old engine was taken out and an electromotor was put in, which was not really sustainable, we thought. But there was one company in Norway at that time that was making full-fledged electric vehicles, and that were also 95% made of renewable materials. And we thought that that was very interesting, and we convinced them to bring those cars to the Netherlands. And we sold them to the city of Amsterdam and to a couple of other big cities, which then had hundreds of vehicles and thought, now we need charging stations. And then they started to tender for charging stations. And that is how in the Netherlands, the market for electric vehicles opened up. And we then thought, how can we accelerate it more? Let's see if we can get a lot of big companies that have large fleets of cars and buy together electric vehicles and make them cheaper. So we had roughly 50 big companies together, and we thought, we're now going to do it. And then I made a very big mistake, because two of the ministers of the Netherlands said, we want to join. We, as the Netherlands, want to add 800 vehicles. And at that time, I thought that that was a nice idea. But when the national government comes in, then you need to do an international buying in with a lot of lawyers and so on. And it took more than 2 years before you could even start buying cars. So I learned from that project that I would never do it that way again, and keep the group as small as possible when you organize something, and don't get the government in the middle of your project. So that didn't work out, but what did work out was that hundreds of people in the Netherlands that were in that project learned about electric vehicles much quicker than they would normally have, and a lot of these companies did buy, in the end, electric vehicles on their own. So we did accelerate the market for electric vehicles, but in another way than we had foreseen. So the next thing thereafter was that we saw that there were hardly any solar panels at that time in the Netherlands, and we thought, there's thousands of people that apply for subsidy schemes, and the subsidy was at that time usually within 1 hour gone, and all those people would then wait for another year. And we thought, if we combine them and we buy together, can we then bring the price down so that you don't even need a subsidy? And I had people that I knew in China that were working there for the solar industry, and they informed for me and came back after a few weeks and said, if you buy 50,000 solar panels, which was 10 megawatt at that time, and the inverters all together, then you can bring the price 1/3 down compared to the market price at that time. So it appeared to be the first solar initiative that was a joint buying initiative in Europe, which I didn't know at that time. And we said, okay, we're going to try it. And we asked people to join us, pay 20% upfront, so we know that you're serious. And within 3 weeks, I had a new bank account with 5 million euros. thousands of people that simply believed me on, as we say here in the Netherlands, on my blue eyes. I had never sold one solar panel before, but they simply thought, I trust this lady and we're going to do it. So they all put 20% in that bank account, and we made the order for 50,000 solar panels. But normally you pay upfront, and then they send the solar panels with a boat to the Netherlands, and then you bring it to your customers. So normally there's 6 weeks in between. Then you have to go to a bank for an interim loan. And I thought, I have already sold them. I have 20% in the bank account, so that will not be much of a problem. But that was not true. But if you go to a bank, then they say, have you done it before? No. Do you have money of your own? No, 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 no. And I couldn't get any loan. So I flew to China and I showed to the people over there, look, I have sold your panels and the inverters. I have so much in the bank account, but I can't get this interim loan. Can you help me? And they said, that's interesting, because the subsidy schemes are going down everywhere and joint buying initiatives might be a new business model. So we help you. We give you a few cents per watt peak, which is the jargon for solar panels, additional discount. And you have to pay us only 3 weeks after the solar panels have arrived in the Netherlands. So we emailed everybody, said, we're going through, and if you pay us a little bit early, before you have even seen them, then you get an additional discount of 50 euros. And then everybody paid us. So when the solar panels were still at sea, we had 20 million in the bank account, which was quite new to me too. So in the end, we did this initiative. And thereafter, a lot of people thought, oh, buying initiatives together, that's a nice model. And we had copycats all over the Netherlands. And we really opened up at that time the market for solar panels. And thereafter, it went very quickly. But when we were doing this, it now sounds quite easy, but it was not at all, because when the boat was at sea, then we had a nuclear problem somewhere in the world, as you might remember, and the boat had to take another route, and it ended up 5 days later in Europe. And then all the lorries that I had ordered to bring the solar panels to the people were gone, because they don't wait for 5 days, which I didn't know. So I have had many of those problems, but in the end we solved them all. And it appeared that I like this entrepreneurial way of doing things very much. And in the Netherlands, this really accelerated the market for solar panels a lot. On top of that, we also made in the same period a book, which we have renewed in 2012, 17 and 19, on how the Netherlands could become a country on 100% solar energy in 2030. Which in 2012 sounded like we still have 18 years to go, might be possible, but now it's only 10 years, and now it sounds for the most people as something that's impossible. And this is impossible in the normal Dutch way. It's even impossible under a so-called transition management way of acting, because that's supposed to take 2 generations. So it should be really handled as a crisis. And that means a completely different approach. But it is still possible. And for Agenda, we are working on the solutions that we have described in this book. So I give you one example. We have examples on housing, on mobility, on every different sector of the Netherlands. But one of the things that we did first was the housing sector. In the Netherlands, people with a house of their own for the next 15 years will roughly pay 35,000 euros on energy. So that's what you throw away on energy bills. I thought, if you bring this money up front and you can make a house energy neutral, which means that you don't have an energy bill anymore. And if you have to borrow the money, you can pay it back in 15 years' time for the same amount per month as what you now pay for your energy. So your monthly cost will not go up. At that time, nobody did that, and no company would want to do that. We started in 2012, and by now we have done hundreds of houses, and this is possible, we can now tell you. But our official institutes still write that it costs much more and that it is not feasible. And because we don't have scientific peer-reviewed research to show them, look, this is what we have done already for the past 8 years, those official institutes don't believe you. So scientists are extremely important for us to show to those institutes that this is possible, because only when it's peer-reviewed in science, then it's real. To me, that's sometimes quite frustrating, because therefore those institutes are always 5 years later. But it's also good, I think, to know that you have an important role to show to institutes and therefore to government that things are possible, which otherwise go much slower. Well, we did a lot of different projects with Agenda, trying to push things and accelerate, open up markets. But after 5-6 years, I looked backwards and I thought, are we moving quickly enough? And my conclusion was no. So I thought we need, on top of what we keep doing, additional things. And the 3 things that I thought were necessary was physical protest. And at that time, that was before all the large marches and so on. The divestment movement, which just started around 2012, and the court case. And I go into those very briefly. You saw at a certain point of time, the marches were coming up. We organized here in the Netherlands the first People's Climate March, and we did a lot of other things in this field. We walked from the middle of the Netherlands to Paris before the conference in Paris, 620 kilometers with thousands of people, and we brought the Dutch TV, the Dutch broadcasting TV on main TV stations with us, and they sent every day 10 minutes on main time. So we had a lot of information that we could spread the whole month. We talked about climate and energy, climate and water, climate and agriculture, and so on, and therefore could, well, spread the news. And I'm very happy with both the young people that go to the streets every Friday and people from Extinction Rebellion. I think it's very much necessary in these times that we don't do only a retweet or a like, but that we make it visible and show the people in power that we want to change. Well, the divestment movement said we can only burn so much oil, coal and gas, and then we have burned too much for the 1.5 or 2 degrees warming to prevent that. And it started in America with a lot of universities that spend money and invest in oil, coal and gas. And I was here at the Free University with a lot of young people that asked from this institute to make sure that the pension funds that all people that work here must be part of, that this pension fund also starts to change its investment policies. And this whole movement was taken over by one of my colleagues, which now has an NGO of her own, and is still doing this. And I think it's a powerful threat. And then our court case. In 2012, we started with telling our government, you have said within the framework of the Climate Change Convention that industrial countries need to reduce CO2 between 25 and 40% in 2020. You have signed for that in hundreds of documents. Well, please do this. And then I received a letter back from the government that said, we agree completely with you, Agenda. Climate change is a big problem with enormous negative consequences, but we don't want to be a front runner, which was very funny because we were at that time one but the last in Europe on renewable energy, and we are one of the largest emitters in the world. So we are not small, and we are certainly not close to being a front runner. So we had our dialogue, and then at that time we could start with this court case. Well, the government of the Netherlands, of course, said we are only very small, so please, judge, don't do this because it doesn't have any effect on climate. I think it's good to know that the Netherlands are among the 20% largest emitters. On this picture, you see the size of China and of America indicate that they are large emitters, but the Netherlands is also a very large emitter. Let's see if I can make the Netherlands shown. This is the Netherlands here. So we are among the 20% largest emitters, but that's not really fair if you compare yourself to, for example, China with more than 1 billion people, and we only have 17.5 million. So it's more fair to look at it per person. And from this group of large emitters, we are in the top 10 of per capita emissions. We emit more per person than China, India, and other big countries. So I think the Netherlands is a very big country in climate change and should set an example. So in our court case, we said, as a country, you have a duty of care to protect your citizens. And the good thing about the whole court case that took almost 8 years was that the government never said that it was not true that climate change is very dangerous. So the fact that we have what's called unlawful hazardous negligence, so that there is a very serious problem, was not debated. The only thing that the Dutch government was saying all the time is there might be a big problem, but we have the freedom not to act. And we said, that's not true. We can go to court and demand from the judges to protect us against an almighty government. That's the balance of power. That's what we call in the Netherlands the trias politica. So we thought this was the basis of our case, whereas the government said that it was absolutely unthinkable that a judge would be in the chair of the politicians. Well, in the end, we won, so they were not right. There is a duty of care to protect your citizens, and because the Dutch government have signed hundreds of documents that they should reduce between 25 and 40%, there was also a standard of care. And the fact that we had this standard made it possible to win this case. It was very important. And the judges said, well, maybe the 40% is necessary. For what we have heard from Agenda, that might be very necessary, but that's up to politics. But the 25%, the lowest level, is something that we guard. So you should reduce in 2020 at least 25% and start immediately, which they didn't do. And I think it's good to realize that we did not ask for anything very spectacular, because when we won in 2015, we were here, and the government had an own goal for 2030 that was 49% less emissions. So if you draw a straight line, you can see that our goal in the court case is on this line. So we're actually more or less asking, do what you have promised, do what you want to do yourself. And still all the years before 2020, they emitted more than they were above this line. So they were not on track for their own goal and also not on track for our goal. Well, then they went to the Court of Appeal, and they had 29 grounds of appeal, which were all one by one slashed by the judges as not correct. And because they went to this court, we thought, well, then we have one counter appeal, because the first court had said, because Agenda is not a human, they cannot refer to the Convention on Human Rights. And we said, well, maybe we cannot go to the Court on Human Rights, but we can refer to the Convention on Human Rights. And the second court said, Agenda is right. There is also a duty of care based on this Convention on Human Rights. So then we had more or less two legs to stand on. The first one was based on civil law, and the second one was based on international human rights law. So the Dutch government should now start to act, which they didn't do again. And we thought, now they appeal again to the Supreme Court, and we must show the court that it's still possible what we have asked for. So we made a plan first with 40 solutions, and later on we added up to 54 solutions together with more than 800 organizations to show that if they would take all kinds of small measures, that it was still possible to reach the 25% reduction in 2020. And this was a coalition for every step. So the 800 organizations were mixed in all kinds of different coalitions. And they all said, we want to help to make this work. So they also offered assistance to the governments to make the 25% possible. And I thought that that was important also to show to the Supreme Court that if they would say Agenda wins, that they would not think that it was something impossible. Because by the time we went back, it was almost 2020. Well, this shows that all those small steps, which you don't have to read, would add up to 17 megaton of reduction, which would be enough to reach the goals. And the year thereafter, it would be more than 26 megatons. So it would also help for their own goals in 2030. Well, the Supreme Court on the 20th of December 2019, so just before 2020 started, said Agenda is right. There is a duty of care, and the standard of care is 25% reduction in 2020, and you now have to act. And then finally they woke up. So in April this year, they said, okay, we close one coal-fired power plant, which is now already closed for a year. They have offered money to a second one to close there, and that one will most likely be closed this year. Then the remaining two new ones will then are not allowed to use their coal-fired power plants for more than 35% of their capacity of coal. And there is a law coming at the moment and most likely this will be coming in the next few months. So there will be two closed and two in the end on 35% of their capacity. And of our 54 different measures, they selected 30, which they are now implementing. So in total, more than 3 billion euros additionally to reach our goals. And because of the COVID-19 crisis, I think they might have reached last year this goal, but it should be structural. So if COVID-19 is more or less under some kind of control and we have more economic activities, then the emissions might go up again, and then they have to take additional measures because they should stay on the 25% less emissions forever. So based on this, we made an international network on climate litigation, and we have been assisting the Irish case, which also won at their Supreme Court. A few weeks ago in France, a big case was one which we have assisted to some extent. There was another one in France in November, and there's actually hundreds going on in the world, and we are assisting many of them. So we really sparked hope with our case, but we also helped people to use climate change litigation as a new strategy for change. And I think it's really working and helping already in many places in the world. So finally, I think there is a very important role for scientists, especially for acceleration. As you saw with the houses that we make energy neutral, we need that scientists say this is correct. Urgenda is making them energy neutral for a payable price. We need this peer-reviewed article. We also used many scientists for our court case. We went to the best scientists in the world on climate change to get the arguments right before the court. And I think it's important to keep going together and make things work. Well, the University of St. Louis in Brussels gave Urgenda an honorary doctorate, so not the person, but the foundation. So it's now Dr. Urgenda, which is kind of funny. I've never seen that in the Netherlands, but in Belgium that's possible. So we're very honored, mainly for our work on the court case, but also for the rest we are doing. We needed to change within 10 years, and I know it's possible if we really want to, and I hope that you are all among the crazy people that are really going to do this. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Marjan. It was a real great opening and a very stimulating talk also. I think we all need to take example, of course, of your great action mode in bringing governments to court, because that's what it takes nowadays, of course, to integrate climate change, but also your interesting, also your personal ambition and also your energy in inquiring big funds with larger groups of people and making actually also things happen. I think that's exactly what this hope that people are needing also to make things happen in a transition, and to see that you can actually, make things going on and make sustainability also going on. So that it was an excellent, talk. So I think, what we can do now, we have 2 more minutes before Christian Felber's talk will start. So there's also time after Christian Felber's talk when there's more time for questions and discussions. So, of course, there is maybe time for one question we can ask. So I was wondering, Sipora or Tamsin, is there a question already we can ask for?
Yes, we have one question. Sorry, can you? Yes, we have one question from Kalpana. She says, where can we find the case law transcripts from the cases you mentioned?
On the website of Urgenda, which is also partly in English, we have translated everything on our court case on purpose. So everything since 2012 is on the website, nicely ordered in time. So urgenda.nl is our website, and you can also then find the English version where everything is translated. And if you have any questions, marjan.minnesma@urgenda.nl, send me an email and I'll help you further.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yep. So I think further questions, just write them up and keep them in stock. And we'll have time also after Christian Felber's talk later to have more discussion with Marjan and Christian. Thank you, Marjan. Okay, having said that and concluding the first keynote talk, we're going to move over to our second talk. And that's Christian Felber. Christian Felber is an international renowned speaker. He's a contemporary dancer and author of several economic bestsellers. For example, This Is Not Economy, or Change Everything, or Trading for Good. And he was awarded several international book awards. especially for Economy for the Good. And he also received other awards. And he's the initiator of the Economy for the Common Good and Cooperative for the Common Good. Felber studied Spanish, psychology, sociology, and political science. And he in Madrid and Vienna, and the latter city in Austria is where he lives. So now we present Christian Felber as our second keynote on the 17th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic, and Social Sustainability. Christian, you can take the stage on screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this conference and contributing with a keynote and on the panel. I will introduce the Economy for the Common Good, which is a practical model of transforming the whole economy towards sustainability first and foremost. We just released the theoretical fundament of it in sustainability in an article that's called From Neoclassical Economics to Common Good Economics. So we first did the practical exercise. Almost 1,000 organizations have already joined and done a common good balance sheet next to their financial balance sheet. And we are also striving for creating bottom-up alternatives to GDP as the highest measurement of success in a national economy, replacing it by a common good product, which contains everything that makes life worthwhile. And these common good products are composed democratically by the people of a city, of a region, or of a country. And my contribution is a proposal to re-establish equilibrium on all levels, because the current economic system we are holding on is creating disequilibria on all levels. And maybe with this entrance, I start sharing my screens. The Economy for the Common Good can be understood as an economy that is based on systemic equilibrium. And it's a proposal to overcome the current crisis, which is not only the corona crisis, which is already preceded by a whole landscape of disequilibria. And they range from inequality to unstable financial markets, to trade imbalances, to power concentration, and loss of meaning and values. And we have just heard from Marian about some of the most burning disequilibria, which is global climate, and even more importantly, the loss of biodiversity. Here is a direct connex to the COVID-19 crisis, because COVID-19 is a so-called zoonotic disease, which means that the virus which infects humans with the disease usually only lives in animals. But if the pressure on the natural habitats of these animals by the way of life and way of running the economy of humans, if the pressure from that is growing too much on the habitats of animals, then these viruses jump over from animals to humans. And this holds true not only for COVID-19, but also for other known diseases like AIDS or Ebola or SARS-1 or MERS. And one thing is clear: if we keep running our way of life as we're doing now, and the economy with that level of consumption of natural resources and pressure on ecosystems, then we will kind of harvest many more pandemics. On the other hand, I want to say pandemics are avoidable. We have actually the free decision to create more pandemics or to avoid them, but then we have to regain equilibrium in the economy, first and foremost with the ecosystems of the planet. It's not only about climate. Climate is one of the 9 most important and relevant disequilibria, but there are others. And the best concept that has been derived from the concept of planetary boundaries I know is the donut concept of Kate Raworth. And from her concept that today 8 billion humans need a minimum consumption to cover their basic needs, but at the same time, we should respect a maximum level of consumption of natural resources in order not to overload planetary ecosystems. I derived the concept of ecological human rights. Marian just said that the best way to compare emission levels is per capita, by person. And that's my proposal, to grant every human being, no matter if she or he lives in the Netherlands, in Austria, or in South Africa, the same level of ecological consumption as a consumption right on one side of the coin. And on the other side of the coin, it's a protection right of nature, because if all 8 billion humans consumed all their consumption rights, mankind as a whole would still remain within the ecological planetary boundaries, different from today, where only a minority is exceeding their non-existing consumption rights, and humanity as a whole is exceeding the limits of the planet. So this would be a first proposal to regain and reestablish equilibrium, but the precondition for it is the integration of this analysis of the broader context of economic activities in economic theory and economic science. And that's actually at the moment not the case. The predominant theoretical school of economics, neoclassical economics, does not consider biodiversity or the planetary boundaries in its theory, because its core theory, although it's called equilibrium theory, general equilibrium theory, is not dealing with any relevant equilibrium. That's my point, my starting point actually, because the equilibrium neoclassical economics is focusing at is the equilibrium between demand and supply. And it's very interesting, it's not at all an irrelevant equilibrium, but there's a whole list of by far more relevant equilibria which are lost out of sight if we focus on the equilibrium of supply and demand. And actually that's what's happening is that thanks to the narrow focus on the equilibrium of supply and demand, we are losing all these other more important and more relevant equilibria. It's the general ethical orientation of the economy, it's the ecological equilibrium, it's the stability of financial markets, it's a just distribution and the prevention of power concentration, it's stability in financial markets and in international trade, and it's the conception of man. I will go through these equilibria one by one now. Here I start with the general understanding and definition of economic activities and their contextualization. The economy for the common good considers the economy as a tool, as an instrument to satisfy human needs in the whole range, not only through market activities, but also through other types of economic activities within democratic societies on the base of long-term cultural values and within the ecological boundaries. This is a quite different start into economic science and economic education from how textbooks, mainstream textbooks used to do it. They jump directly into markets and mathematical models, and they neglect these relevant contexts. And they do not ask properly what's actually the goal of economic activities, and consequently, what's the goal of economic science. And our proposal is that economic activities should generally and principally serve the common good. And this is already a quite different approach from the approach that economic activities should serve making money or increasing capital. And interestingly, the distinction of these two different understandings is not new at all. It was made 2,300 years ago by Aristotle. he did not only distinguish two different definitions, but even two different concepts. Oikonomia is by definition an economy for the common good, because the goal of this moral science is the well-being of all members of the household, of the oikos. And money and capital were just considered as means to help achieve the goal, which is the common good, the well-being of all. And if this relationship of means and ends got inverted, he said this would then turn into the opposite of oikonomia, become chrematistike, which is the art of making money and to enrich oneself, but that would not be considered as economy, oikonomia, anymore. Today we use the word capitalism instead of chrematistike, but the legacy of Aristotle is that capitalism is actually not the same as economy, but the opposite from economy. That's a very interesting legacy. And the original oikonomia was actually an economy for the common good. Now we have to make a choice. Do we want to opt for capitalism or for economy? Constitutions have made this choice, and I have not found a single constitution which has opted for capitalism. Every single constitution that makes a decision on this big question, should it be capitalism or economy, decided for economy. Just read the first one, maybe. The economic activity in its entirety serves. It does not say the accumulation of capital or the increase of money. No, it says it serves the common good. It's crystal clear. It's not ambivalent. It's not dialectic. It's clear. And there is no constitution which says something else. And now comes, then why then, if constitutions of democratic countries today, we are back in the present, why then do we measure success not according to this goal? Because if we measured success according to the achievement of the constitutional goal of the economy, then we would measure the success of a national economy with a common good product, and the success of a company with a common good balance sheet, and the success of an investment with a common good exam. But we're not doing that, or we're only going in tiny steps in this new direction. But over the past decades and maybe even centuries, we've done something different. We measured economic success not according to the achievement of the goal, but according to the accumulation of means. And this is, almost sorry to say, a failure of method, at least in a true economy that deserves that name and that is in line with our democratic constitutions. It is fully coherent in capitalism. So with GDP, financial profit, and ROI, financial return on investment, we do measure success properly, but only in capitalism, which is not supported by our constitutions. In the economy, which is actually by definition an economy for the common good, we ought to measure success with the common good product, balance sheet, and assessment for investments. And our proposal to define, starting with the common good product, is to assemble as free and sovereign citizens and make many proposals. What are the most important ingredients of the highest possible life quality, including ecological sustainability, including health and happiness, including fulfilling and flourishing relationships and functioning democracy, including everything that makes our lives worthwhile, then the democratic composition of the common good product would be the guiding star, let's say the highest end and purpose of economic activities. And success of economic activities could be measured according to their contribution of companies measured by the common good balance sheet, and contribution of investments measured with the common good exam. Then the whole system of success measurement of a true economy would be in line and consistent with the constitutional goal of the economy. That's not only modest, but it's a very clear and maybe simple proposal. The common good balance sheet already exists. We have developed it amongst many diverse experts and practitioners. has been applied by almost 1,000 companies. And as we haven't had this bottom-up process so far, what we have done is using the best available existing results in democracies, which are fundamental values that are already enshrined in our constitutions, which you see in the green horizontal line, from human dignity to solidarity and justice, environmental sustainability, of course, climate stability and stability of biodiversity, to transparency and co-determination. These are not our preferred or preferential values. These are the most frequent fundamental values in democratic constitutions, and we propose to measure, at least to evaluate, but maybe even to measure to which degree a company or any other organization lifts these values towards its stakeholders. And then another small innovation of ours, in order not to just have another sustainability report, which is not binding nor comparable with others, we propose to make it measurable and comparable in its results, maybe not in euros or dollars, but in common good points, and then put the result on the label of all products and services, the front door and the website of every company affected. Then, only then, consumers and investors have a better informed choice in markets, and policymakers can help companies that do not externalize costs, because they internalize costs and externalize benefits. Today, they have higher costs as a consequence and higher prices and a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis other companies that do externalize these costs and thus damage the global climate and biodiversity. And as a consequence, they are rewarded systemically today. They have lower costs, lower prices, and a competitive advantage. How can we fix that? Well, linking the common good balance sheet result to a whole range of incentives, starting from public procurement in local communities and cities, to economic promotion programs, to differentiated tax rates, to differentiated loan conditions by ethical banks, up to the global world market, to differentiated access conditions to the world market. The exercise is successful once the most climate-friendly products and services are the cheapest ones for consumers. Same with the financial system. Maybe I jump over this because I just have 2 minutes left in my presentation. I already made a mentioning that banks would only grant credits into the real economy and only after having approved an ethical risk assessment next to the financial risk assessment. The summary would be that it would still be a market economy, but it would no longer be a capitalistic market economy. It would be an ethical market economy, and it would be something that resembles much stronger the original oikonomia than the original Schematistike. In this diagram, you see that there is an alternative to capitalism and socialism. It's an economy, and needless to add, for the common good. So I think I have just 1 minute left, so I only end in headlines. Same with global trade. Instead of having to decide between two extremes, which is opening completely or closing completely, which is enshrined in the European Treaty today, we could choose ethical world trade, which considers trade as a means and not as neither as an end in itself nor as something bad. And this would create a completely different trade order than today. We know from citizen assemblies that people would support such an intermediate and moderate approach. The proposal is to change the European Treaty, turning trade into a means for the global common good. And maybe I don't have the time to go through my arguments, so I just close in order to respect the time with the global movement that we have created. 3,000 companies have joined in the last 10 years. This is when we started, in all sectors, from agriculture to banking to public health insurers, getting a prize in a climate conference in Poland. Municipalities are joining, cities are joining, Amsterdam is entering the economy for the common good. And we have the support from the European Economic and Social Committee. A majority of 86% approved the inclusion or the recommendation to the European institutions to include the economy for the common good in the European law and the law of its member states. Yes, and you're welcome, more than welcome, to join in the Netherlands or wherever you live, in your local chapter, in your university, or in your city council. This is where we are active, and I'm happy to share more in the discussion, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Christian. What a great talk it was. Indeed, it's very energizing, and it's a great overview you gave also of your research and your work. It's about nature protection rights, the ecological footprint, re-embedding the economy, the common good matrix and the common good balance sheet, and especially the ECG label, which are very innovative tools. And of course, the legal incentives, the ethical market economy and ethical world trade. So indeed, let's change the system. And I think that's also a nice, a nice way to open up the discussion floor. So first, maybe ask Tamsin. Tamsin, I guess you have been listening with us. There must be tons of questions by our viewers.
Yes, we have a few questions. So the first question is for the first plenary speaker, and it says, did Rabobank not finance wind and energy of Uganda? Please clarify. I'm hoping I articulated that correctly.
Yes, can you rephrase one more time, Tamsin? So it's rather...
It said, did Rabobank not finance wind and energy of Uganda? Please clarify.
Clarify, okay. Marianne, did you hear the question?
No.
The question was, did Rabobank finance also the energy transition? Did or did it not Rabobank?
Well, we have been to almost all Dutch banks, which did not want to give us a loan. But in the end, we did work with the Rabobank for some transactions, but not the loan was not given by the Rabobank either.
Okay. So you got that answer? Yeah.
My apologies, I cut you off. The next question we have is, I wish to know if you also take up the impact of intellectual property rights on sustainable innovation, which effectively is ECG. I'm not sure, Kalpana, who that question was for.
The question for Christian. So Christian, intellectual property rights on ECG. Have you thought about that?
Yes, of course. But I don't know if I'm not sure if I got the question correctly. If we propose to continue with intellectual property rights or have a different solution, for that I have an answer. That
just go
could
ahead.
have been the question. Yes. Well, we would enhance sharing, not exclusive property rights. But intellectual property rights are first and foremost patents, and we would redesign the protection of intellectual property rights towards the incentivation of sharing. So an inventor who shares his or her invention or insights would be rewarded stronger than an inventor who protects it exclusively. That's the general point. Maybe the example is open source. Companies that opt for open source, they would get stronger and positive incentives than companies that still use strict and rigid property rights. And maybe in the longer run, we would opt for reducing property rights, starting with food and medicine. Their property rights are too strong in this field, and we would start by weakening them up in these fields.
Would you claim, maybe to follow up this question, Christian, that property rights might be a capitalist phenomenon, which you actually want to avoid in your common good matrix?
Yes, because the value is sharing rather than possessing. And that's why we would redesign the system of incentivation for innovations. We know that humans are motivated stronger intrinsically, and protection rights, possession rights are extrinsic motivation factors. So we don't need them in order to be innovative and creative. And that's why we have a very strong psychological and neurobiological argument for changing the legal framework for innovations.
All right, thank you for that answer. That clarifies a lot. I'm looking at also the stream of questions.
Yes, we have a question from YouTube as well. It says, "Thank you for your excellent and important presentation. How do you analyze the power of the notion of trickle down as a significant engine of the economy and its relation to common good goals?" I hope you can hear me. I think that one's for Christian.
I think so too.
Yeah. Well, the trickle-down theory has just proven be untrue. It doesn't exist. All the contrary, power concentration and inequality are on the rise. Another nice metaphor, the rising tide lifts all boats, equally has proven untrue. It's not true that if the economy grows, all boats, which would mean all companies or all people, get richer in the same rhythm. That's just not true. It's falsified empirically, and even the Castanet curve has been falsified, which was the hope of neoclassical economists that it's sufficient to make GDP grow, because in the end everybody will be benefiting. So all three pillars of neoclassical economics and neoliberal politics are broken. And that's why we would, in line with Kate Raworth, opt for a distributive design from system theory. And system theory says that if you do not frame bigger, richer, and more powerful actors in the economy and prevent them from becoming even richer, bigger, and more powerful, then the whole system will collapse one day. And I think we have partly entered into this collapse of society. That's why we opt for negative feedback mechanisms or balancing feedback mechanisms. That would mean that when people enter into professional life or start up a company, then society helps them to get growing. But then there is a free market, and we only help those who externalize benefits. And the bigger and the richer and the more powerful both natural persons and legal persons become, the more difficult it becomes to keep growing until a balancing ceiling. And that was exactly what happened in the United States and even UK in the post-war time, where, for instance, not only, but for instance, the top income tax rate was over 90%. And the goal behind was not a higher revenue for the state. The main goal behind was to prevent society from excessive inequality. And today we don't even remember these times, because the economic textbooks don't tell us that that was the case. And this was the time of highest prosperity and the strongest social cohesion in our societies. So this would be my answer, getting back to these negative feedback mechanisms, radically progressive income taxes, inheritance taxes, and property taxes, not in order to punish property, but in order to to remain the social equilibrium in our society.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Indeed, these are interesting thoughts and also food for thought, I would say, and maybe also to shift the discussion a little bit on the consumption and production theme, because that's also underlying, of course, a different economy, and was also a previous discussion held. I also wanted to put the question a little bit to Marianne as well, because Marianne also has of course many actions also for transition in the Netherlands and in international context, and I'd like to hear a little bit more from Marianne's actions in the food change or the food sort of transition. And you know that Paul McCartney, or the famous ex-Beatles, Sir Paul McCartney, wrote a book 10 years ago about meatless Mondays. He said that with one day a week, eating no meat, we would just change the whole climate change debate. So, Marianne, do you have some input for the discussion on the food, which might also influence the economy for common good?
That's another big topic. We have been working on this transition from protein from animals to vegetables, and we had this Veggie Friday and Meatless Monday and things like that. And we've been trying to help the solutions that are part of this protein transition on a higher level. At the moment, we are mainly working on helping farmers to improve what they are doing. Like at the moment, many farmers use one type of grass, which is very bad, and even use pesticides and other things on their grass, which are not necessary. And we offer them herb-rich grass, which is very good for biodiversity, for half of the price. And we have crowdfunded that with people in the Netherlands who want more healthy soil. And that's working very, very well. And we have farmers waiting because it was sold out within a week. And we are helping what we call the caring farmers, which is a group front-running farmers which want to do it differently. So we're doing many of those different things, but I'm not sure whether, not really on the food market, but more on the agricultural side of the market at the moment.
It contributes to the food market, of course, but it's a food change, of course. Yeah. All right. Anything for you, maybe on that consumption production theory? If we, of course, in the economy of the common good, Christian, we also are also making people more responsible on their consumption, especially when you look about the ecological footprint. So it's all related. Yes. Maybe.
I fully agree with the line of Marianne, and what you just said reminds me of our first hotel that did the Common Good balance sheet, because one of the first measures was that they introduced 1 meat-free day per week. That was their measure. The consequence was that the cook quit it. And they said, well, then it's meaningful. Then it's better that he leaves, because 1 day without meat a week is not radical. It's just the first step. And if not even that is okay with the cook, we ought to have another cook. And the next cook brought the hotel into the gold milieu. So that was a very beneficial step. More seriously, the health insurer that I presented, why did they get the Global Climate Action Award at the COP24 in Poland, in Katowice? Because they succeed to convince their clients to eat less meat as the most important contribution to climate stabilization. And they do it successfully, and that's why they got the Global Climate Prize. But in order not to depend just on the Common Good balance sheet or another non-financial reporting tool, there are others we know, and we can talk about this too. And of course, we also support carbon taxes and carbon tariffs. But these individual consumption rights, they would ultimately be a liberal approach, because in the same way that every human being has one voting right, but we can do with this right what we want to. This is our liberty. We would have the equal ecological consumption rights. And what we do with them is our pure freedom. If one person prefers to eat a little bit more of meat, but have no car or go by bike and have a little bit a bigger flat, this is our personal freedom. And that's why I consider these personal consumption rights not only as a proposal for sustainability, but also for liberty.
We have in the Netherlands this so-called TAP coalition, which is a large group that we are supporting, and they want a higher tax on meat and to put this in a large fund and help then farmers to make more sustainable food and a better agricultural system. So there's many different solutions at the moment going on, and what we need now is governments that are going to implement those new solutions and not just little steps and a little bit of the same, but really major changes. And I see on all different topics now that there are coalitions coming from society with very good solutions, but you need to break out of the bureaucratic system and really make a big change to do that.
Is this an old-fashioned top-down, bottom-up like discussion, that we have things coming up from society, now we need the government to take action, or is it more complex than that, you think?
Well, in a way, you do need a government, but you also need a lot of people to think out of the box. And for example, you have this group that says, why don't we, in the Netherlands, 50% of the farmers don't have a successor. Why don't we pay them, but more than normally for agricultural land, and then use 10% of the land that is coming free for houses, because we have a shortage. And that, from that part, you earn so much money that you can pay the whole plan, and then the rest you can make either nature or really circular agricultural land. And well, then you need to change things in the law, and you need change in thinking, and you exclude a group of people who earn now a lot of money by buying grounds and putting houses there and earning money from it. You need to organize this centrally to make sure that you can make it budget neutral.
Right.
So there will be a group that doesn't like it.
Sure, yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
I have a question to Marian,
Yes, go ahead.
If
Christian?
you allow, because I'd like, of course, I support the lawsuits in order to protect the global climate. And my reasoning is, why is it even necessary that we use these lawsuits? Why isn't the economic system protecting our commons and our ecological? So there is already a strange disequilibrium going on between the protection of private goods and the protection of common goods. So even our legal system is in disequilibrium, and equilibrium would be that common goods are equally strictly protected as private goods. But that's not the case, and that's why you have to do these lawsuits. And my question to you is, if you've heard about the citizen assemblies that swapped over from Ireland to Germany very strongly now, and France, and the first citizen assembly on the national level on climate protection was held in France on the invitation of Macron, and they produced something of 150 proposals, and he committed to implement most of them, not all of them, but most of them. But what's your view on this innovation of democracy? And the question behind this, might this be a more effective way of practicing democracy?
Sorry, we can't hear you there in the auditorium. Sorry, we can't hear you there. We can't hear the response.
Marian?
I'm very much in favor of it, and we try to help in the Netherlands to establish that too. And if it works well, it works a lot better than the current democracy, because in those citizens' assembly, often 90% of people agree on something. Well, you hardly ever have that in the parliament in the Netherlands. And if 90% would say we want stronger climate policies, as they did in Ireland, we would not have needed our climate case. So I agree with that.
Right. And there is the Citizen Assembly of Climate now in the Netherlands being founded at the moment.
Yeah, we have. There is the Extinction Rebellion has been pushing for it. Other people like we have been pushing for it, and there have been 2 people in Parliament demanding the minister to work on it. So there's now a group working this out for the next government, which is selected in March.
Yeah.
And I'm a member of this group advising the official committee.
Thanks. Tamsin, is there another question maybe from the audience?
Yes, we have a few questions. We have another one from YouTube that says, there is a discussion about widening our circle of compassion to include non-human animals as well. Animal welfare is an important topic. Do you see that as part of your economic model, Christian?
I'm very proud to inform that our article from Neoclassical Economics to Common Good Economics ends with emphasizing that Common Good Economics is a non-anthropocentric approach. It's an ecocentric approach in which dignity is not exclusively reserved for human beings, but for all beings. Actually, life is considered as dignified and holy, and that's the philosophical and ethical foundation for extending protection rights even to non-human life and ecosystems. And that's why one day it will be a matter of course that ecosystems are protected by law. And then these lawsuits will not, in the ideal case, they're not necessary anymore because they are as strictly respected as private property is now. So it's a clear yes. And maybe just to repeat these individual consumption rights, they seem on the front side of the coin be a human right, but and I call them ecological human rights, but on the back side of the same coin, they are legal protection rights for nature. They are nature's rights, and that's already the implementation of that thought.
Right. Thank you. I think it's really interesting to hear all this sort of widening discussion on consumption and production. I was wondering, I'm sort of putting the question to both of you, since, and then we can wait if there's some time left for other questions, but that in the previous discussion today, we talked also about transitions, and we talked about, do we need a revolutionary mode or do we need an evolutionary mode? And that, of course, that also, before we go to action sort of type of research, but maybe Marianne, I see you as a sort of revolutionary model in transition. What
classic and real evolution takes way too long.
Evolution takes way too long. Right?
Some people say the transition approach is an evolutionary revolution. But I would say let's make it a crisis and treat it as a crisis and make the changes within 10 years. And it is possible if we really realize in every cell that it is a crisis. And for many people, this is still a concept or a word, but I see what's going to happen in the second half of this century. And if you really see this, then I think if you would be able to live in 2080 and look backwards, you would think, shit, why are we not acting? And that feeling is what we need at the moment.
Okay, so do you take the same sort of temporal framework as Marianne, Christian, of like the next 10 years is what has to be done, or do you see another time frame for your economy common good matrix?
Yeah, maybe 10 to 20 years are the critical. The next 10 to 20 years are the critical ones. I agree, but I would distinguish differently. I think that we clearly need a revolution in our mindset and in our paradigm of economic science. The subtitle of my recent book is a call for a revolution in economic science, but it's not my word. It's a word from the 20th century from Thomas Kuhn, a thinker of theory of science, and he kind of predicts that from time to time paradigms shift from one to another. And I think what is now happening is the beginning of a paradigm shift from neoclassical economics to a more holistic, a more sustainable, a more embedded, a more pluralistic paradigm in economic science. And for that, we truly need a revolution. For the implementation of the transition from one paradigm to another, I'm clearly a supporter of an evolutionary approach. And Economy for the Common Good is doing exactly this. We collaborate with existing actors in society. We collaborate with existing companies, with existing banks, with existing municipalities and cities and with existing universities. And maybe the most concrete example I can give is that our proposal to link the result of the Common Good balance sheet or of the B certification or of future food companies or of GRI, once it's measurable in its result. Now, as we are giving billions and billions of euros and dollars to companies to support them to overcome the crisis and to survive the crisis, we could differentiate, not giving the same amount or the same proportion to every company, but help those companies who have a more sustainable business case and more sustainable and ethical products and services than others, help them more than others. And this means we already could use the idea, use this leverage and this steering effect. So that's the practical side of the economy for the common good.
Thank you. All right, we almost come. Yeah.
We have time for maybe one more question.
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
So I'll just go to the next question in the list. Could you refer us to an experience about social society urging their governments to state public policies in order to reach a common good product?
I guess that's for you, Christian.
Yeah, any kind of public policies to reach a common good product. Yes. Well, when did we vote for GDP? I don't remember any country that held a referendum on GDP next to other alternatives. So it kind of trickled into our public policies of economic policy, but it was actually never voted upon. And now it doesn't work anymore. We measure growing GDP and sinking happiness in the same countries. We have asked people if they want to continue with GDP. I know surveys, reliable surveys from the governments in Germany and UK, majorities say, no, we don't want to continue with GDP. We would prefer to shift over to a gross national happiness, to better life index, to sustainable development goals or something that we create. And my proposal for public policy to get a common good product is to organize a citizen assembly on the national level, to invite citizens to participate and contribute. And from all proposals that are made, probably 200 or 300 proposals will be made. What are the most relevant ingredients of life quality? Which are the factors that make life most worthwhile? And from that, we sort out only 20. And the 20 finalists will become we call them the facets of the common good diamond, or the 20 sub-goals of the common good product. And then we ask experts to operationalize these 20 finalists and of course, parliaments who commission this process to their own people. And then they are in the role to also approve it and enshrine it. I think the best place to enshrine it is in the Constitution. It can also be a law, but then it's the constitutional goal of economic policy, which is in line with the constitutional spirit that already exists. Then Article 151 in Bavaria would not only say all economic activity serves the common good, but maybe in Article B it will say, and it is measured with a democratically composed common good product. That's my vision.
Right. Thank you for that great answer. And I see that a stream of questions goes on in the chat. So maybe Christian or Marianne, you have time, you can maybe try to answer questions in the chat as well. Because I want to thank you both for the discussion. I think we had a great discussion also on different wide-ranging sustainability goals coming from both of your presentations. I think we already have set the stage for a very wide discussion, and also ranging from climate lawsuits and also from common good indexes of the economy. And so I think this is a great start already. for the conference. So I thank you both again for this nice presentations and the discussion. And I think we go over to David Humphries, my co-convener, and he will speak to us also from the organization. David.
Okay, thanks, Sjoerd. I was meant to speak earlier after the two Philips, but unfortunately I experienced a Wi-Fi disconnection. My apologies for this. It seems to be part of a broader problem of disconnection that people living in the United Kingdom have been suffering from for the last 2 or 3 years. But I'm the network chair for Common Grounds on Sustainability Research Community. I'd like to give you all another very, very warm welcome to the International Conference on Sustainability, this annual gathering of scholars, activists, policymakers, business professionals and concerned citizens. Thank you very much to Marion and Christian for getting the conference off to a stimulating start. I was interested to hear from Marion about Extinction Rebellion, who I view as one of the great progressive movements of our age, in drawing people's attention to the problems of climate change and the hazards we face. I'd like very much to thank this year's partner institution, the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute, the leading think tank on environmental sustainability. And thanks especially to the organising committee, Philip Patberg and Sjoerd Kluving, who we both heard from, and also Nicolene van der Griep and Sipora Zoetfeller, without whom this conference would not have happened. We chose as the conference theme, accelerating the transition to sustainability, policy solutions to the climate emergency, because of the urgency of the task that confronts us. When the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change publishes 2018 report on the 1.5 degrees Paris climate target, it estimated a remaining window of only 12 years. This was in 2018 to establish effective climate mitigation measures. There's now just 9 years left, according to this warning. So the question we're considering at this conference on how we can accelerate the transition to sustainability has been enormously complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic can be seen as a form of unplanned experiment. We certainly didn't want it, but we can study the environmental consequences that result from the pandemic with interest. And there's some impressive scholarship going on that is relevant to how we can use the economic recovery from the pandemic to forge the transition to a green economy. Will we take this opportunity? There's been a lot of talk of a Green New Deal, a Keynesian economic package that takes its inspiration from Roosevelt's New Deal that used taxation and increased government expenditure to lift the US out of recession following the Wall Street crash. So a Green New Deal would, amongst other things, use fiscal policies to tax environmentally degrading activities and use government expenditure to subsidise and stimulate the transition to a clean economy. There's a whole range of actions that are necessary to decarbonise the economy, some of which the private sector will venture into, but some of which perhaps they will not. And I've found very interesting here the work of economists such as Mariana Mazzucato, who used to work at the Open University where I work, who argues that only the state has the economic power to take the investment risks that businesses may not be able to take. Climate change might also sometimes seem normalised into the way that we all live our lives, but we have agency, alternatives are possible, and things can be done differently, as we've been hearing from our two plenaries this afternoon. We can use our research and our teaching and our lives as citizens to press for infrastructural change from the existing carbon-intensive infrastructure within which we're all embedded to a new low or no carbon infrastructure based on other energy sources, wind, solar, wave, and so on. I think this conference is an important hybrid space that can break down barriers of access and to work up and work through some of the solutions for the future. We have a broad global involvement of a range of concerned stakeholders with the commitment and the energy to find solutions. We have an exciting range of events planned for you. We've already had 2 wide-ranging and impressive plenary addresses. So thank you again to Marion and Christian. And we very much look forward to hearing from Diderek Samson shortly. I see Diderek's arrived, and thank you for joining us today, Diderek. And we'll be hearing from Ilona Otto, who will speak to us on Friday. We have 2 talking circles planned, both on the last day of the conference on Friday. The times are in the programme. but the times have been tailored to two global audiences. Colleagues from Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australasia will be the first talking circle, with the second one tailored for colleagues from the Americas. And you are very welcome, of course, to attend both. Please come along. The talking circles provide an important opportunity to process what we've learned from the conference. What are our take-home messages? How can we do things differently as a result of the conversations that we have had over that we will have over the next 3 days?
Thank you, David, for this very stimulating work. Sorry, sure. I have to, yeah, but this was very happy to hear you give a stimulating introduction to the conference. And I think we go over now.
Thank you.
To the next speaker. But thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right, so Diederik, I'm going to introduce Diederik Samson now. Diederik Samson is a Dutch environmentalist and politician who served the Dutch Labour Party, where he, among other things, was responsible for energy policies, initiating the Dutch climate law. Since 2 years, Samson is head of cabinet for first vice president of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, where Samson is responsible for all policy proposals in the field of climate and the environment. Samson had earlier been involved in environmental issues as with Greenpeace and also with other agencies. Diederik Samson is concluding the keynote session of today at the opening of the 17th International Conference on Environmental, Cultural, Economic and Social Sustainability. Diederik, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me in this strange environment that we've all been caught up in now for way too long, but that's another conference. Let me explain you a little about the Green Deal and the concept behind it and the things that drive it, because that's maybe the most important part of my introduction. The Green Deal, as you might know, is got its birth at the beginning of the mandate of the von der Leyen Commission, somewhat over a year ago now. And it stands out from, let's say, normal environmental plans that you can receive dozens of per year from Brussels. And it stands out in a few ways. The first one is its ambition. For once, politicians didn't settle for the lowest common denominator, the feasible, the payable. No, we went for the urgency at hand, the things that matter and the ambitions that need to be met in order to face future generations, which is climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest, but also stop the loss of biodiversity, stop the loss completely, because comparing apples to oranges, the loss of biodiversity might be even a bigger threat to the life of next generations than climate change is. But also the connected objectives of stopping pollution altogether, stopping the further pollution of water, soil, and air we've polluted enough, and create a fully circular economy. It's not only about energy, it's also about products. And those goals are taken together. And that's actually the second difference from, let's say, normal environmental plans, because normal environmental plans normally deal with one thing. So you have a plan on energy, and then later on transport, and then somewhat later you receive something on forests, and then on water, and then on agriculture. And then you find out that most of them are working against each other. Now, for once, we designed one concept, one plan for that one ecosystem. In this plan, everything is connected with everything else, which, come to think of it, is pretty logical, because in our ecosystem, everything is connected with everything else, as we now endure during this pandemic. And the third difference from this environmental, or this Green Deal has from normal environmental policy, is that it was actually not an environmental policy. It's a growth strategy. And I remember my old friends from the environmental movement raising some eyebrows on that concept, because how on earth can you present an environmental ambition as a growth strategy? And I do think that's possible, because growth is not only a size, which is not very relevant or even harmful if it's too big, but it also has a direction, and the direction is the relevant. So if we can make our growth go into another direction, we can still keep the dynamism of Europe alive, or actually we can inject new dynamics into Europe, because let's face it, we need new innovation. We need new dynamics. We need a new impulse. This is an aging continent in many ways. The people are aging, the buildings are aging, the industry is aging, and we are longing for new momentum. So the Green Deal was supposed to bring that new momentum. So that's all in December 2019, unaware of what was about to come, what was about to hit us all. Because in March, just after we delivered the climate law, which enshrined this objective into a law to the example of what the Netherlands did earlier, or actually the UK did even earlier than that. So we had to, just after that March law that we put on the table, Corona turned our lives upside down. And I must admit that for a moment I despaired a little, because we've seen this before. We've experienced that moment in which politicians finally mustered the courage to put a long-term objective on the table and translated that into concrete plans. And just as they are about to implement those plans, something urgent comes by, wipes it off the table, because the urgency takes all the political capital, it takes all the political momentum, it takes all the financial capital, and there you go. We've seen that before. When Al Gore walked into Europe with a movie in his back, mesmerizing the audience, including the leaders. And I remember op-eds from Tony Blair together with Jan-Peter Balkenende urging their fellow leaders of Europe to step up to the plate to tackle climate change, because Al Gore had opened their eyes. This was the urgency at hand. This was all in 2008. And then Lehman Brothers fell, and we haven't heard back from an inconvenient truth. There was a sequel, but as with all sequels, less popular and less spectacular. And this time, that could happen again. I mean, the financial crisis is a small thing compared to the Corona pandemic. So you could expect that while we just had mustered the courage to put a Green Deal on the table, it would be shelved in the lowest shelf possible in order to fight and deal with the pandemic. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen. The opposite happened. Because what we now are seeing is that the Green Deal is the heart and mind of the recovery strategy for Europe. Because it was a growth strategy, it was fitting for purpose. After the Corona pandemic, we are in dire need of a growth strategy, and here it was. And there's a common consensus from left to right of the political spectrum that building back should be green, because it makes no sense to build back to the old and then try to transition it into something sustainable. You can better build back green in the first instance. So we now have a Green Deal as part of our growth strategy, as part of our recovery package. And what made the difference between now and those years of the financial crisis? I think the difference is not that we have better politicians or better civil servants. No, the difference is twofold. First of all, yes, it's technology. Technology moved in the last 10 years at a mind-boggling speed, something to get very optimistic about. If you look at what solar panels did, what a cost curve and the development curves of solar panels were, they were defying every expectation up to today, and I think even tomorrow and the day after. The Energy Agency is publishing all those prospects for solar energy, and those guys, you could say, they get a living for it. They know what they do. They are professionals, and they are wrong every time, because the real development is much faster than all the prognosis. And the same is for offshore wind. 10 years ago, hardly affordable, cost billions of euros to put down an offshore wind farm. Now we are entering a stage in which an offshore wind farm has to pay in order to use our public space to produce energy. And the same story for electrical cars. In 2009, the electrical car from consumers entered the market. Yes, it was a sort of it was a cumbersome little wagon with an axis radius up to the garden gate, and then it was empty again. Now we are moving into a phase where the big car manufacturers are leaving and abandoning the internal combustion engine for good and turning their whole catalog into electrical cars. It's a spectacular development. But that's only one part and not the most important part. The most important part of the difference between now and 10 years ago, that's our children, the youngsters of today's generation. They make all the difference. I dare to say that they were the reason that the Green Deal is on the table in the first place, because that little girl sitting in front of her school in Sweden turned into a movement that influenced public opinion. We saw it in the European elections. We see it in elections afterward. We will see it in the upcoming elections. Even in Corona times, climate is an issue. And it's actually the only issue next to Corona that survives in this all obliterating agenda. But those youngsters do more than just marching in the streets on their Friday movements. They also ask questions at the kitchen table, pertinent questions about small things, about why do we eat so much meat, about bigger things, why do we fly to Bali for a holiday, but also about existential things. What are you doing, Dad, to save my future? And if that dad appears to be the CEO of BMW or Volkswagen or Tata Steel, or appears to be a politician or a civil servant, a head of cabinet in the European Commission, maybe, it's a quite existential question. It's much more existential than a bad headline in the newspaper or a bad shareholders meeting. It's not being able to answer your own kids. I think those kids and their freedom to speak and their urge to speak out is now changing this world. And that's a pretty optimistic thought, because let's face it, they will be around for a while, longer than we are. So if they stick to their agenda of first influencing their adults and then taking over the helm themselves and finish the job, because we won't be able to finish the complete job, they can do it with the education they get right now, with the spirit they have, and with the dedication they show. They can change this world for the better. So the Green Deal is just the beginning of this journey towards a sustainable future. I'm optimistic that we can make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Diederik. It was a great talk, stimulating talk also at the end of today's keynote session. And I'm actually eager, also to give the floor to some questions, maybe from the floor. Maybe ask the first question, fire off to you, which is, of course, that you already said that we are in a crisis. So this is a Corona crisis, and of course there is the question of how many, and also you give examples of how in history, bank crisis, for example, wiped out sustainability efforts or other crises. So that also gives you, of course, the prospect of how many crises can a society handle. And given that, I also want to give you Christian's comment from the previous discussion, Christian Felber's comment about that we need a revolution in our head. So how would you respond to that?
I'm not sure whether we have a revolution. What the definition of a revolution in our head is. I was pointing at our youngsters, and they might have a revolution in their head, and they clearly revolutionize a society at the moment. But to your first question, as I said before, indeed, the banking crisis wiped away the political agenda on sustainability. That's true. It, however, didn't kill innovation. It may be, and the researchers and the economists and the historians might judge on this later, but it might have given birth to some of the innovations that I just sketched on offshore, on electrical mobility. It might also be coincidence, but we have to conclude at least that it did not kill off the human spirit and the creativity and the innovation that can happen over time. And as I said, that's a pretty optimistic story. The serious part of this story is, however, that in order to meet the finish line in time, we need 2 more decades of this incredible innovation. And it's far from guaranteed that that will happen out of itself. So that's why the Green Deal and actually all the other political agendas now hopefully emerging, one emerging in the US. We also see the first sprouts of it in China. So political agendas are very relevant because we cannot count on creativity and innovation to just take us along. We were lucky in the last 10 years on this aspect, but we now need to guarantee that. So, and that's what the Green Deal is doing. The Green Deal is not there for a 30-year journey. The Green Deal is here to put the world on that sustainable pathway in the next 5 years. Then it needs to happen. If we don't put the world or our economy, our society on an irrevocable pathway towards a sustainable future in the next 5 years, then I would almost say, don't bother, because by then we will be far too late.
Thank you. Any questions from the room? Does even the room according to Tamsin, or the room here in Amsterdam?
Yes, we have, I'm just trying to bring up the questions here. Sorry, I can't see one right now. Maybe we want to just, I believe it's in Dutch, so I will not be able to read it. Perhaps we can pass over to Sephora. Could you see it on the YouTube channel? I'm not sure if she can.
Question on the YouTube channel. There's going on.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. And I'm also looking. Yeah. So indeed, as you said, the world is changing at the moment, and I'm very happy. Also, you made this reference to the youngsters, which are of course very important. And yeah, there's a question by Mark Beumer, and he says that the problem is that only will act when a disaster happens, and another problem is money and the will to change, like did become clear during the Climate Adaptation Summit. Can you have a answer for Mark on his?
Well, there will always be, and also in the near future, there will be quite sobering events in which we will be put down on earth, back on our feet. In that reality, that change is always slower than you actually anticipate. But let's look at the change around us and compare it with 10 years ago. As I said, that is a mind-boggling difference between night and day. I mean, I've been fighting for sustainability all my adult life, and I've been bracing for what sustainability actually meant. It meant delay, disappointment, and setbacks. It was always more expensive than we wanted. It was smaller than we hoped for. It didn't work as well as we were promised. And that was basically our lives for all of us working on sustainability for a long time. And now all of a sudden things are going much faster. As I mentioned, the CEO of BMW, those guys in those big automobile factories, only a few years ago, they were clearly thinking that the electrical car was just some hype that would go away, that would blow over, and they would go back to their strategy of making more efficient and more effective internal combustion engines like they did in the last 100 years. And now all of them have peeked around the corner, so to speak, and they have seen the new future. And they've actually been pretty scared about the speed at which that future is nearing. Because, well, let's take that example for Volkswagen. They will invest an 18 billion amount of euros in the next 10 years to invest in their electrical drivetrain. 18 billion euros in 2 years' time. That's not an investment plan, that's panic. And they will manage. I drive one myself. I'm not allowed to make an advertisement here, but it's a pretty good car, like you can expect from such a company, and they've seen it. So I do acknowledge that sometimes you get setbacks and delays and things are soberingly slow. But at the same time, we've never moved as fast as we are doing right now.
Thank you. Diederik. So just wondering if there's more questions for Diederik, because of course the time of a European Commission member is limited, I would say. But we're happy to. Yes.
We have a couple more questions. I've managed to get a translation, and I apologize for that. So we have one question that says, what do you consider, they're actually both about the Green Deal. So what do you consider the biggest challenge for the implementation of the Green Deal, and how do we tackle it? And where is the global leadership for the Green Deal? Where is the locus of power and consensus?
Okay, the biggest challenge from a sectoral point of view is by far agriculture. The sector that is hardest to transition into a sustainable future. By far, it's much more difficult to change a few million farmers and their attitude than to change a few steel factories. And I'm not underestimating the difficulty to transition a steel making process into something sustainable. But agriculture, from a sectoral point of view. From a political point of view, fairness. So redistribution of our efforts. A fair share of our efforts towards climate neutrality is going to be the big thing in Europe. Because even in our pretty egalitarian society, there's big differences between member states and within member states, within countries. And that is by far the biggest challenge. I can predict you that 90% of our energy and political capital and our work will not go to incentivizing solar farms or putting up offshore wind farms. It's not easy, but that's only the 10%. 90% of the work will go into convincing people to show solidarity towards the ones that don't have a big income, or to member states that have a different starting position and need to decarbonize their electricity sector from coal to something sustainable, while others have just to move from gas to something sustainable, which is a much smaller step. So here we are. That's the biggest. That's the biggest challenge.
All right. Thank you, Diederik. Tamsin, is there one more question, maybe?
Yes, we have time for just one more, I think. So this question is from Inez. Climate neutral by 2050 is too late, according to, is too late. Dutch climate law and the Green New Deal does not follow scientific advice, and this is not fast enough. Does Diederik think that politicians are still only doing what's feasible instead of what's necessary according to science? Should we treat the climate and biodiversity crisis the same way that we treat coronavirus?
Well, it's different, so we can't treat it the same way, but I understand the question. The IPCC tells us that if Europe goes to climate neutrality within this time frame, so before 2050, we are actually on a sustainable pathway. It's still a huge chance, or a too big a chance, and it's a political judgment whether you think that probability is too big, but there is still a probability within this time frame that we overshoot. Yes, because there's a lot of things are unknown, and there's no such thing as one point in time, or actually one line down. It's a bandwidth. So we're taking sort of the middle of that bandwidth, and some of us, and rightly so, say you can't take a risk. So you have to take the lower bound of the bandwidth in order to be completely safe. And indeed, if you take that, we have to be climate neutral by 2040. We didn't do that because we can't. If we say we are driven by science, we need to take the consensual science, so not a few scientists on one side, also not a few scientists on the other side, but let's say the common denominator, which is the IPCC.
Thank you. And I just had one thing pops up in my mind, Diederik. Maybe you also have some view on teaching. Do you think that maybe a new course in maybe lower schools, higher schools should be decarbonize your system?
Well, as an engineer, I think engineering should be a course in every primary school, secondary school, and university, because we need a lot more of them. But we also need lawyers. Yeah. We need them a lot. I advocated for a course in sustainability for a long time, but I actually think that's obsolete right now. Because if I look at my own kids, but also at their friends and their youngsters, they teach themselves what is important in life. And they teach themselves that sustainability is one of the most important things in life. If you have opinion polls on the young people, it's by far the number 1, 2, and 3 issue on their agenda. So we, luckily, I would say despite the fact that we failed utterly to teach them the right thing, they taught themselves the right thing.
Thank you, indeed. Okay. Just looking at the storyboard, I think there's some nice discussion also on the Rabobank again, that it's working with farmers also for a good and fair transition to more sustainable agriculture. So I guess you know this from the Members' Council. And so that also agreed that there's sustainable banking, there's sustainable movements within financial institutions as well. I'm just looking around my head, and I think, yeah, we come to the final part. There's a question from Sephora. No, there's nothing. Okay, great. I think, Diederik, yeah, you made it pretty clear, and you gave a very clear message. And I also like very much the ambition which comes out of a European Green Deal. And the ambition, I guess, is needed also. And I'm happy that the European Commission can send out this to Europe, I say, and maybe also to the world beyond, because of course the signs from other places in the world are there, and we need to take this responsibility, of course, to change the future and to make the world more sustainable. Okay, I'd like to thank you again, Diederik, for being with us, and hope to see you some other time, and hopefully you can, making also. And there's one maybe last. A question here from Montserrat. Yeah, so it's always at the last time, of course. The Green Deal is about making a climate neutral EU. How can we prevent the risk of this gaining all the political attention and shifting to the side of other pillars of sustainability as declared in the 2030 agenda?
Well, the purpose is actually to create one sustainability agenda and connect, as I said in the beginning, try to connect climate and biodiversity and circularity and pollution in one plan. I do acknowledge, though, that climate is the political heavyweight in this triumvirate, basically. And indeed, we have to take care that the other parts of the sustainability agenda are not obliterated by climate as the one driving force. I sometimes have the feeling that, for instance, the circular economy, which is an integral part of our sustainability agenda, is like that kid at the end of the meeting raising its hand and saying, oh, we have to talk about sustainability. And then everybody else is already packing its bag and about to leave, say, oh, yeah, we talk about that next time. That's sometimes the feeling that circularity has in this whole framework. As a comforting conclusion, this is where climate change was 10 years ago. At the end of the meeting, somebody raised his hand and said, hey, we have to talk about climate change. And then everybody packing its bags said, yeah, we will talk about that next time. And here we are, 10 years later, climate change is in the heart and center of our politics. And we will not wait 10 years to make circularity, biodiversity, pollution, to give it a similar place.
Thank you, Diederik. I think that was a very nice conclusion. That concludes, I think circularity is always a nice theme to end with, such sessions. Gives us all bring home with a good feeling. So I'd like to thank you all again. Thanks, Diederik, also for the discussion, for answering questions from ourselves. And we really thank you all to attending this session. And we're going to conclude now the keynote session, the first keynote session of the Sustainability Conference. I'm going to remind you that in 18:30 there's a masterclass with Christian Felber. You can still sign up for, I believe, or you can attend, but that's, I guess you have to check on the website for that. And Thompson, is there a last thing we need to mention before we check out?
Any Zoom links or links to the masterclass are all in the event schedule online. So if you have any problems finding them, it's just all in the event schedule.
All in the event schedule. Okay. All right. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Have a great night, wherever you are. Also check out the asynchronous session, which are great, of course. And we see you back tomorrow.